All right, for 2 weeks in a row, Texas A&M getting that 2:30 CBS game Central Time. Gary Danielson is the lead analyst for CBS Sports College Football Game of the Week, and he'll be on the call alongside Brad Nessler and Jenny Dell this Saturday, 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 Central, when Texas A&M travels to Knoxville to take on Tennessee. And Gary Danielson is with us here on TexAgs Radio. Gary, good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. It was a really interesting football game last week, highly competitive. It obviously could have gone either way. And, those are the type of games we love to do, watching great athletes and unbelievable, situations. And, the atmosphere was second to none. So it was a fun game to do. Probably not the right outcome for you guys, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, the outcome was sour, but I guess the hard part for A&M fans is that here we go again. You got an opportunity to seize a moment, and you're not able to. And, of course, it's Alabama who, all indications they were supposed to be having a down year. It doesn't look like they're having that down of a year anymore, Gary.
Well, let's be honest. Nobody would have dreamed, and we've all watched them play, and we've done a lot of work. Jalen Milroe played a great football game. If he doesn't play that well, there's no way that Alabama's going to win that football game. But you can't. You can only control what you can control, and there was a lot of things that A&M could have done better. But I think the game that Milroe had, and I think also, Alabama finally did themselves to putting the right receivers on the field. I felt they were playing too many different players, and once they settled on a couple guys, Bond and Burton, they started making plays, and that's what happens. That's why you play the games. And but the wild card was Milroe. He just had an outstanding game.
Well, let's move ahead to this Tennessee game, and I look at this as a huge game for both programs, not only for where we are in the season, but the two roads they will take afterwards. If A&M gets their third loss, it kind of changes the entire kind of story that
Right.
this early. And for Tennessee, getting a second loss this early with really their only second real test.
Yeah, this is a high stakes football. This is what it's like. I did it for years in the NFL. People in the real world, what they love about sports is fun to watch unless it's your team and they're not, living up to the expectations. It is all about expectations. And, A&M has a really good football team, but you've got to produce. And in college football, it's not like the NFL or even, baseball or basketball where you can withstand a few losses, still make the playoffs and have a great season. For the high end teams, the Alabamas, Georgias, Texas A&M, USC, Michigan, you can name them just as good as I do. Success is measured at a really high level, but it's for both teams. When you're in a business relationship, somebody's going to sell a piece of land and somebody buys a piece of land. Both people end up being happy with the transaction. The guy who sells it is happy. He thinks he did well. The guy who bought it is happy. But in sports, we know right after the transaction, one's not happy and one is happy. And that's the tough part. The A&M team it's got a really good team, a lot of good players, and have put in a lot of good hard work to get to the level. But you still got to win it. There's breaks that go into it. There's outside influences of referees, bad bounces. And right now, A&M has a good team, but you're right. One more loss and the season's going to look like not living up to expectations, and that's tough to take if you're an A&M fan.
So obviously this is a different Tennessee team with Joe Milton at quarterback, and different wide receivers, obviously, with the injury to Brew McCoy. So tell me what you've seen from Tennessee this year, what makes them a dangerous team.
Yeah, you're right. Their wide receiver triumphant is not where it was a year ago, especially when Tillman was healthy. Jalen Hyatt was a great player, and Herndon was playing at a really high level. Joe has been nicked a little bit. He does have a big arm, but everything is not folded together yet for Tennessee. They run the ball well on offense. They've got good receivers. They don't have, difference makers yet at receiver that people have to defend or change their defense for. The strength of their team is they've got a unique offense that stretches a defense. And we know A&M struggles in their secondary. So that's going to be an area that Tennessee will probably attack. But just like A&M, the other strength is their front 6 or 7 players that rush the quarterback. So it's going to be an interesting contrast. And I probably figure the same thing is going to happen in this game that just happened. I was kidding with our people just to kind of step aside a little bit as we prepared for the game. I go, I could almost use the open I did last week for this week because it's basically the same football game. Whichever offensive line allows the quarterback to play at a top level will probably win this game. So both fronts are extremely good, and whichever offensive line has trouble or the most trouble for the whole game probably will be in the difference in the game.
Well, that was the thing that struck me about this past game, and we knew this coming into it, how the A&M does in the trenches will determine the success that they have this year. They had played pretty well until that second half against Bama. What have you seen from their line this year outside of that second half?
So, listen, it's not for me. I understand the complexities of putting together a game plan, and I can critique it from afar, but I wasn't part of it, day in and day out. I thought that A&M needed to throw a little more short, quick, crisp passes, wide receiver screens, tunnel screens. I just felt that they were putting a little bit too much pressure on their offensive line, especially in the second half. And, I think there's ways that they could have attacked Alabama so that front seven wasn't giving their offensive line, especially the two edge rushers, as much problems. But they couldn't get it done. I think it's going to be even more apparent in this game because Tennessee will try to negate the pass rush for A&M with their quick spread passing game. And if A&M can hold up and take that away, the difference in this Tennessee team that is different from a year ago is Hendon Hooker was a good runner out of the pocket. Joe Milton is not a great runner. So they have to rely on their running backs. Last week, Jalen Milroe was a threat, and it probably affected the A&M coverage a bit. I don't think that that's as big a threat this game. So there's a lot of different ways it can go, but none of it's easy. We went at halftime and thought A&M had all the answers, and it found out that they didn't have all the answers in the second half.
Gary, I assume with A&M being on CBS as often as they have been over the last few years, you probably got a big highlighter covering the name Ainias Smith. Just talk about what he brings to Texas A&M every year.
So we got to meet with Ainias, and you're right. It was tough for him to go through that injury last year, but he's the modern player that everybody's looking for. A guy that can do it all from his position. Obviously, he can still play running back if he had to, but I think that's the one position that the A&M needs to continue to circle to make it easier for Max Johnson. He's a big weapon, and then that'll open it up for Evan Stewart and the other receivers. But I think you're right. That's another area that I think A&M, if they had to do it over again, and I was saying it during the game, they're struggling, so they have to start thinking players. And I think they got to find more and more ways to get the ball to Ainias Smith. Now, he was open for a touchdown, and Max was a little late getting it to him, and it ended up being a big play for Alabama. But if I'm starting my game plan, just like Alabama made Jermaine Burton the pressure point, I would make Ainias Smith the pressure point of this game.
No doubt about that. Let's talk about Max Johnson for a moment. He's had some really big moments for A&M this year, and he's had some lower moments. How would you assess his play?
I think Max is a tremendous competitor, and he understands, what to do and how to run the offense. He doesn't have as quick a trigger in my mind as Connor did, and to me it slows down the offense just a bit. So I think he has to be quicker with his decision making, maybe a few more pre-snap decisions, and get the ball out of his hands to help his offensive line. He's an extremely proud football player, and football is really important to him. He's going to be coached hard this week. I think we're going to see a lot of improvement in the timing in his passing game this week.
Gary, let me ask you just a couple of SEC questions. How do you think Texas and Oklahoma will adjust to life in the SEC, at least in the initial couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really fun. I'm really sad to leave the league. I've had a great job doing these games. Our games every week are tremendously competitive with high consequences. Texas and Oklahoma are really good teams. A lot of people were saying that Oklahoma was going to walk into the league and be a disappointment. Well, they've rebuilt really quickly here, it looks like, and then, they'll fit in really nicely. nothing will be easier, but all the pressure, not all, the pressure is part of playing in the SEC. It's like the NFL. I mean, every game's a tough game, but part of the pressure will be toned down for the fan bases because of the 12-team playoff. You'll be able to lose a couple games and still get in the playoffs. And I think that'll make it more realistic for these programs going forward. And I guess that's what A&M fans are, really upset. Not upset, but I mean, just thinking of a missed opportunity. They had that game ability to beat Alabama at home and take this final West Division. They've got a team that was good enough to win it. And now they're dependent on somebody else losing games for them to get into it. But I think Texas and Oklahoma are going to find out what it's like to tee it up every week with people of equal or almost equal talent.
Well, Gary, that tees me up for my last question for you. It feels like, at least at this point, here we go again, Atlanta, Georgia, Alabama, at least the way things feel right now.
Hard to argue against that. Alabama's getting better. They still have weaknesses. They have weaknesses, but it looks like they're improving each week. They're probably the team to beat.
That is Gary Danielson. He'll be on the call this weekend as A&M goes to Knoxville to take on Tennessee, 2:30 Central Time here, local time in Texas. Gary, I appreciate your time. Hope to do it again at some point.
You got it. Thank you.